It was a breezy afternoon in the heart of Philadelphia, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted out of the corner cafe. Inside, a mix of chatter and clinking cups created a warm, inviting atmosphere. Barron Trump sat at a small table near the window, his tall frame slightly hunched over a thick book. Wearing a plain hoodie and jeans, he was trying to blend into the crowd, seeking a rare moment of quiet. As the youngest son of a former president, Barron's life had often been a whirlwind of public appearances and scrutiny. But here, among strangers sipping lattes and scrolling through their phones, he felt an unusual sense of anonymity. Lost in his book, Barron was startled when a sudden sharp voice cut through the cafe's hum.
You think you're better than the rest of us?
The voice was loud, stopping conversations mid-sentence. Heads turned toward a man standing a few feet from Barron's table. The man appeared to be in his late 40s, his weathered face etched with anger. Though his clothes were clean, they bore the signs of hard times. Barron froze for a moment, not out of fear, but surprise. This wasn't what he had anticipated when choosing this cafe for a peaceful afternoon. The tension in the room thickened as the man's voice rang out again.
You've got everything handed to you on a silver platter. Do you even know what it's like to struggle?
His voice trembled with anger. Other patrons exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. The barista behind the counter hesitated, her hand hovering near the phone. Barron closed his book slowly, placed it on the table, and looked up at the man. His demeanor remained calm as he said,
Sir, I'm not sure what's upset you, but maybe we could talk about it.
The man scoffed loudly.
Talk? You want to talk? What could you possibly have to say that someone like me would want to hear?
The cafe fell silent, everyone holding their breath for what would happen next. Instead of matching the man's aggression, Barron did something unexpected. He gestured to the empty chair across from him.
Please sit,
he said, his tone steady and disarming. The offer took the man aback. His fists remained clenched as he sneered.
Why would I want to sit with someone like you? You're just another spoiled kid who'll never know what it's like to live in the real world.
Barron's response was measured.
Maybe you're right. I haven't walked in your shoes. But if you sit down, you could tell me what that's like.
For a second, the man seemed to falter. His anger wavered, but the tension in his shoulders remained. Finally, he grabbed the back of the empty chair and dragged it noisily across the floor. Dropping into the seat, he crossed his arms defensively, his jaw tight.
Fine,
he muttered.
You want to hear about the real world? I'll tell you.
The cafe's patrons leaned in slightly, pretending not to eavesdrop but clearly invested. The man's tough exterior cracked as he began to speak.
I had a job, a family, a decent life. Then the factory I worked at shut down. Hundreds of us left with nothing but empty promises. I tried to hold it together for my wife and kids, worked whatever odd jobs I could find. But when you're scraping by, it doesn't take much to break you.
He paused, his voice trembling.
My wife, she left, took the kids with her, said she couldn't live like this anymore. And I can't even blame her.
The man's gaze shifted to the table, his fingers tracing the wood grain as he spoke.
Do you know what it feels like to walk into a room and know everyone's judging you, thinking you're nothing? That's my life now.
Barron listened intently, his face unreadable but his eyes empathetic. The man's bitterness hung in the air, heavy and raw.
And then I see someone like you.
The man continued, his voice rising again.
Sitting here with your fancy clothes, reading a book like you don't have a care in the world. It makes me mad, because no matter what I do, I'll never have what you have.
Barron waited a beat before responding.
I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes,
he said softly.
But I do know what it's like to feel judged. To feel like people have already decided who you are before you've said a word.
The man's eyes narrowed.
What could you possibly know about that?
Barron's voice was steady but carried a weight that made the room feel smaller.
You might think I've got it easy because of my name, and in some ways, you're right. I've never had to worry about a roof over my head or food on the table. but that doesn't mean I don't know what it's like to feel misunderstood.
The man shifted slightly in his seat, his arms loosening from their defensive cross. Barron leaned forward.
Everywhere I go, people make assumptions about me. They don't see me as a person. They see a caricature. Someone they can project their frustrations onto. Kind of like what's happening here.
The man's face twitched. Barron's words seemed to strike a nerve. He didn't respond, but his posture softened further.
I'm not saying my struggles are the same as yours.
Barron continued.
They're not. But pain is pain. Feeling like you're invisible or like no one understands you, that's something we all face.
The room was silent, the kind of silence thick with thought. Finally, the man exhaled sharply.
You really believe that?
Barron nodded.
I do. And I think maybe deep down, you do too. Otherwise, you wouldn't have told me your story.
The man's tough exterior cracked a little more. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing around as if noticing for the first time how many people were watching.
You're not what I expected.
He admitted, his tone softer. For the first time, the tension in the cafe began to dissolve. The man's body language shifted from guarded to contemplative. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice stripped of hostility.
I came in here mad at the world.
He said, shaking his head.
Mad at people like you, who I thought had it all handed to them. But maybe I've been carrying that anger too long. Maybe it's not about you at all.
Barron nodded, his expression gentle.
I think it's easy to blame people we don't know. It's harder to face what's really hurting us. But you did that today, and I respect that.
The man looked up, his eyes meeting Barron's for the first time. There was no anger left, only a weary kind of gratitude.
You're a good kid,
he said reluctantly.
I don't say that often.
The barista resumed her work, and the patrons exchanged glances, their expressions softening. The man stood, smoothing his shirt awkwardly.
I think I owe everyone here an apology,
he said, his voice carrying across the room.
I came in here angry. But this kid, he reminded me that sometimes we just need to listen.
Quiet applause rippled through the cafe, heartfelt but subdued. The man nodded, visibly moved, and made his way to the door. Before leaving, he turned back to Barron.
Thank you,
he said simply. Barron's smile was genuine.
And thank you.
As the door closed behind the man, the cafe seemed to exhale collectively. Conversations resumed, but something had shifted. There was a shared understanding among the patrons, a reminder of the power of empathy and connection. Barron picked up his book and sipped his now cold tea, a faint smile playing on his lips. Around him, strangers began to exchange kind gestures, holding doors, sharing smiles, even picking up tabs. The day felt brighter, not just for Barron, but for everyone in that cafe.